guys, welcome back to my channel. So this is the first official episode of my form check series. So I'm calling this thing FACTS, which is short for form checks, advice, cues, technique, and general powerlifting support, since I want this to not only be form check but also just like other general Q&A stuff that you guys can ask me. And thank you everyone who submitted videos. I went through the submissions, read your comments, and also typed up like a bunch of stuff that I'm going to follow when I talk about it. So I wanted to like look through them beforehand instead of just doing it on the spot, because I want to make sure I get everything and I have time to think about stuff before sharing it with you guys. If you didn't submit a video, or if you did and you want to submit your list for next time's form check, you can still do that. You can submit videos every single time. The link will be down below, as well as the video with me explaining how to fill out the form. And also, just disclaimer, this is just my opinion, you don't have to follow it. And for my tips, it's best to try them with a lower weight, not just like change it suddenly on your heaviest set, for example. And for cues, not every single cue works for everyone, so you want to like play with them and see which one works for you. And like same thing with technique, you don't want to make any drastic changes all of a sudden. You want to slowly ease into it and just like do what still makes you comfortable. And also, all of these different athletes are in different stages of their powerlifting journey, and so no hating on any beginners. We've all been there at the very beginning where we like didn't even know how to pick up a bar. Okay, so starting off with the first person. So the first submission I got was a squat video from Wrong, and he said he has problems with his shoulder rounding and sometimes he has a weak grip and the bar slides down. So looking at this video, first of all, I'm not sure if it's the bar or if it's something else, but the bar looks like it's like shaking in between reps. Like when you're resting at the top, the bar keeps on moving. That can really tire you out because you're trying to like counter out that movement. So try not to shake between the reps, and the only movement at the top should be one breath of air. So instead of like taking several breaths of air at the top, it's best to try to control it to one. So just like a deep inhale, because first of all, that doesn't give you a lot of air, and also small breaths don't help you brace, and that also makes you shake. And with upper back tightness, I would say try to bring your shoulder blades more back. So it kind of feels like at the very top of a pull-up when your like scapulas are retracted and like you're really tight. I'm not sure about your grip, but what I do is I like to grip pretty narrow, so that makes my shoulders like more this way. And also, like breathing and upper back tightness goes hand in hand, so you want to make sure you have a deep breath between each rep. And a lot of times, like when I don't take a good breath, I feel like my shelf, like my traps, aren't tight enough, and that causes the bar to slip. So really use your inhale, like a deep breath, to make sure that your traps are tight. Another cue that could help is to bend the bar around your back. So if you have a bar like on your back, you try to bend it this way. That's a good cue for engaging those muscles. And also, you could try to keep your wrist angle more straight. So right now, like your wrists are like this, and try to keep it more straight, because the bar should be fully on your traps with almost no weight on your wrists. So yeah, out of those things, I think that should help with like the bar sliding down. Another thing that could help is that I do notice the bar path moving slightly forward a tiny bit at the start of the lift. So when you start, your bar path goes forward and then down and then back up. You could try to initiate the lift with your hips more, so like your hips push back more than your knees at the start of the lift. That makes your upper back less upright, so the bar doesn't slide down as much. That may help with the bar sliding down as well. And lastly, if that doesn't help, then you could try setting up with the bar a little bit lower on your back, so more of a low bar positioning. But with a more low bar positioning, you would have to lean forward even more. That would just like be totally new technique. So with all of those, something like a tempo squat, like where you go down really slowly, would help to make sure you're mid-foot at every stage of the lift, and to practice not having the bar sliding down and maintaining that upper back tightness. So the second submission is from Amruta. I hope I'm saying your name right. And she's only been lifting for 2 months. So first off, with your squat, I would take off the barbell pad, since your back is supposed to be your shelf for the bar, not a pad. And you can either put the bar on your traps, so like on this muscle for high bar, or below your traps, so like right under it, right here for low bar. And it shouldn't feel like the bar is sliding around, and it shouldn't hurt at all. And if you bring your hands closer, it might be easier to find that. And the next important thing to work on is to make sure the bar is mid-foot at all times, so that makes that bar pad straight. So I would recommend doing really slow squats, like pausing at different points in your lift, feeling that the bar is mid-foot and you're not leaning forwards or backwards. And once you're mid-foot, throughout the whole movement, that should fix all of your other problems like your back angle and that kind of stuff, because sometimes you're leaning more forward and sometimes you're leaning more back. So yeah, I would just do really slow squats. And for bench, I think you should first of all improve your setup and your unrack, because that's what sets you up for a good lift. So you want your shoulders and your upper back to be in position before you even unrack the bar, because when you have heavier weight, it's impossible to move this part. So make sure your upper back and your shoulders are in place before you unrack the bar. To maintain your upper back tightness, make sure to breathe before starting the lift, so don't breathe during the lift. And on the way down, try to make sure your bar path is straight and not wobbly, and that takes a bit of experience, so that's not too big of an issue. And since you plan on competing in the future, you can try working on your pause. So at the bottom, you want to pause for a second, and on the way up, don't think too much about bar path. Just think about your final position where your arms are straight and just push directly to there. And bar path should be natural for pressing up, especially for beginners. So other variations that could benefit you are tempo bench, long pause bench, anything to work on your bar path on the way down. So slowing down the eccentric, working on the pause, and then on the way up, it should come naturally, especially when you load more heavier weight. Okay, so next we have pause. He has been lifting since 2019 but dislocated his kneecap, took a break, and just started lifting again. And these are the only weights he has. One of your questions is that does it make it easier when you don't put the bar on the floor? So not resting the bar on the floor does make it harder on the muscle, since it has to like keep that contracted position. But for me, it's easier on the nervous system since you don't have to restart each rep. So what you can do, I would say, is to do a concentric deadlift and a eccentric RDL. Basically, on the way up, you just do a deadlift, like a conventional deadlift. On the way down, instead of doing a reverse deadlift position, which is very awkward since it has to like pass your knees, you could do a eccentric RDL, and you do place the bar on the floor. I think that will benefit you a lot and also make the lift harder, because in conventional deadlifting, we usually don't put the bar down the same way as we lift it up. When we put the bar down, it's just a hip hinge, so there's like not a lot of knee bending, just your hips. So basically it's a RDL. So that's why I think a eccentric RDL would work well for you. Also, it's more natural and does make the lift harder. You just go up as a normal deadlift, and all the way down you do a RDL. And when you do RDLs, you can do it pretty slowly, and that should make the lift even harder. Also, I would say try to elevate the plates so you're not deadlifting from a deficit, because it messes up your form at the very bottom and makes it more uncomfortable. So if there's anything uncomfortable with deadlifting from that part, then I would say try to lift it higher. But deficit does make the lift much harder, which makes sense since you don't have a lot of weight. But if it's awkward, then I would raise the weights up. And like for the deadlift itself, you could try to pull the slack out more, so make sure your arms are straight before lifting the bar up, and make sure your back is tight before initiating the lift. The first rep wasn't that good with that, but the rest of it were okay. And once the bar is near your knees, like when it passes your knees, you want to use more quads. So think of pushing your quads forward, like towards the bar, and keeping your knees forward a little bit longer, and like keep the bar in touch with your thighs the whole time. And for your kneecap, since it can't be operated on, you can try going to a physical therapist if that's an option for you, and they should be able to help you train to make the area stronger. But if you can't go to a physical therapist, you could just go on YouTube and search like dislocated kneecap exercises or something like that, and then there's always videos that have exercises that specifically will help with that. But like lifting weights and like doing these compound movements will make the area stronger, but there are some isolation stuff that you should try to do, and I don't know the specific ones, but if you go on YouTube and just search it up, there should be a lot that pop up. And also for squat versions, the ones you mentioned, which are Bulgarian split squats, goblet squats, and just a regular squat, those are the main ones you can do without a barbell. But you can also do lunges. I'm not sure how that would feel on your knee, because for me, I don't like doing lunges because it messes with my knee. But to make any of those exercises harder, you can add in tempo and pauses. So basically do things slower and then pause at the bottom. You could do drop sets where you like hold a heavier weight, work until like RP 9ish, and then use a lighter weight and do that until RP 9. Also, you can increase your range of motion. For example, with squats, you can stand on 2 boxes. Make sure they're really sturdy and safe. Have a weight in the middle, and then that way you can squat deeper. Or with Bulgarian split squats, you can raise your leg higher, and all that you can play with like how high and low your feet are to increase your range of motion, which makes that stuff harder. So yeah, hopefully all of that will help you. Okay, so next we have Luna, and Luna has been lifting for 2 years. So starting with squat, I would say your technique looks pretty good. First of all, I think you could try to clean the walkout a little so you're not wasting too much energy that could be used for squatting. So when you walk out, try to aim for 3 sets, 1 step back, another step back, and then you adjust laterally. The less steps you take, the less energy you save, and the more you can focus on squatting. On the side view video, you lost a little bit of tightness at the very end of your eccentric, so that at the very end when you're right about to go into the hole, and that did make your squat a little bit harder. So try to keep that last part very controlled and keep your core braced. If you keep that part tight, then your squat is going to bounce up really well. And you mentioned you had wrist pain. Wrist wraps should help with that. They should be wrapped over your joints, so around like 2 centimeters above. You can't wrap it super high because that's against the rules, but you want to wrap it over the joints so your wrists are not able to move like this after you wrap it. And also they shouldn't be restricting your blood flow, but you shouldn't be able to bend it unless if you're holding weight. And if that doesn't help, I would suggest widening your grip a little bit so you're not in a very restricted position. Usually widening your grip does result in less wrist pain, so you could try that out. Last thing about your squat is I noticed you have a little bit of hip shift to the left of the video, which could mean some imbalances in your hip and ankle mobility. And I'm not very professional in addressing these things, but I didn't notice it, so I want to let you know, so you can try to search it up yourself. But I know Squat University has great videos on checking mobility balances. It should be something with your hips or your ankles, where there's one side that has limited mobility and that causes your body to shift as you go up. But you definitely want to try to search this up and fix it, especially if it's causing pain. And a lot of times like hip mobility or even ankle mobility will cause knee pain, so it's like a chain reaction. Next, for bench, from the unrack, try not to lift your feet after you unrack the bar because you can lose tightness, because you want your feet all the way to your arm to be like a really tight system. If you have to, try moving only your heels, so keep your toes on the ground or like slide your feet around instead of like completely lifting your feet after you have unracked the bar. And for the bench press itself, a cue I have is when you bring the bar down, simultaneously try to think of bringing your chest to the bar, and that will help you stay tight more. So think of your chest meeting the bar instead of just bringing the bar down to your chest. And when you start the press, you lose a tiny bit of tightness, and usually it's something with the eccentric, so try to stay more tight during the eccentric and think of pushing your upper back into the bench as you press the weight up. You don't want to just only think about the bar moving. Instead, you want to think of your body moving, and that usually engages more muscles. So like for example, on the way down, think of chest to the bar. On the way up, think of your upper back into the bench. And with leg drive, you want to be more constant throughout the whole lift. So I usually do around like 7 out of 10 leg drive when I bring the bar down, 9 out of 10 leg drive during the pause, and then 10 out of 10 leg drive during the press, instead of going from like a 5 to a 10 from like the eccentric to the concentric. So even though the press is the most important, you want that force to be constant. And technique wise, it's pretty good, other than a little bit of wobbliness in your arms, which usually does happen with heavier weights. But if you want to really help train that, you can incorporate tempo work, so like a 3 count eccentric, 2 count pause, and then a 0 count, which is like as fast as you can press, to help with the wobble stuff. And for deadlifts, first thing I noticed is that your hips rise first when you start pulling, so the lift turns into more of a stiff leg. First thing to try with something like hips rising first is to try to look forward instead of down. So either look in front of you like me looking at the camera, or you can look like around 6 feet in front of you on the floor, which sometimes is more natural with conventional deadlifting, and that should help with your hips rising first. And then try to push your heels into the ground more than your toes, and that makes the center of mass a little more behind. You still want your toes to be pushing on the ground, like almost even pressure, but a little bit more in your heels should help. And also try to think of pulling the bar up your shins and your quads. Make sure the weight is like leaning onto you kind of, instead of having the weight dangling in front of you. You don't want to rest it on your thighs because that's hitching and that's like disqualification, but you want you and the bar to be one movement. And also you can try to pull the slack out a little bit more, so try to have more lower back tightness. And rounding your back is okay, but you don't want to have any flexion. So like once you start the lift, you don't want your back to be bending, but a little bit of rounded back is fine. My tip for pulling the slack out is to pull slower off the floor and don't let your form break during that time. So like if you're deadlifting 200 pounds, you don't want to be pulling 0 pounds all the way to 200 pounds, like jerk it off the floor all of a sudden. You want to slowly ease up the weight. So feel like you're starting with like 100 pounds, so the bar isn't moving yet, and you slowly add more force until the bar comes off the floor. And during that time period, you don't want your form to break, and that should help with your tightness, and that should help with your hips rising first as well. And For your knee caving, I would suggest standing a little bit closer, like a more traditional conventional stance, which is shoulder width apart. I think the problem with your knee caving is that when your hands pass your knees, they like go right on top of your kneecap. So you try to move your legs in so your hands are outside your knees. But if you stand a little bit closer, then your hands are always outside your knees, so you wouldn't run into that problem. Or you could just go a little bit more wider, like a froggy sumo stance, where your hands are inside and don't touch your knees. So anyway, you just don't want your hands gliding right on top of your kneecaps, because that does cause a lot of friction and like just makes things awkward. But with the knee caving, if it's only with heavy lifts and there's no pain, then it shouldn't be a big problem. And variations that could help you get stronger off the floor are pause deadlifts. That's the only one I would recommend. I don't really like doing deficits because it does mess up your form. Like for example, for me, I have a really like secure setup position for my deadlift, and when I do deficits, it changes that. So I wouldn't recommend deficits, but paused are definitely really good. So you just pause like 1 inch off the floor for like a second. Okay, so next we have Dylan, and he seriously started training for powerlifting in February. So for squats, he said that he really struggles with hips rising first, and the walkout feels awkward. So first off, for the walkout, I feel like it's a little bit slow since you don't need to take more than 2 steps back. So like just 2 small steps back is totally fine. You're not gonna hit the pins if you walk 2 steps back. So try to walk back less. So it should be back, match feet, and then lateral movement. And try not to spend a lot of time with like 1 foot forward and 1 foot backwards, because that does make your like stance a little bit wobbly. So try to get in place as fast and as clean as you can. Your hips rising slightly first is not a big problem since it's just a tiny bit. Almost every single powerlifter squats with their hips rising a little bit earlier, and that's normal, especially for low bar. That amount of hips rising first isn't bad, especially for a PR. So I wouldn't worry too much about that unless if there's pain or that kind of stuff. But to help with that, the issue usually starts at the eccentric, like when you're going down. So right when you go into the hole, you lose a little bit of tightness and your core loosens. If you can get a belt, that should help. You want your core to be braced and not collapse in the hole, which in turn will make you more explosive out of the hole and not lose energy and causing your hips to rise first. And a variation that can help with that is pause squats, and that should help with you staying tight at the bottom. And for your deadlift, you can lock out your knee a little bit later, because in the video you locked your knee a little bit early, making the final part of your lift only the lower back. So try to keep your knees forward more and unlocked for a longer amount of time, and use more glutes to lock out instead of your lower back. So think of the lockout as a hip thrust, and keep your knees forward longer. Knees should lock before your hips, but you don't want them to lock so early that you turn your lift into a stiff leg deadlift. That lift did move pretty well, and I would say it's around RP 7 to 8, so you definitely have more in the tank. Okay, so next we have Rooter, and he's been lifting for 2 years, and I just want to say all your lifts look pretty good. There's nothing big that needs to be fixed. So I'm like trying to really nitpick here. For squats, the only thing I noticed that maybe needs to be looked at is your bar path. At the start of your lift, you're a little bit behind midfoot, like you're leaning backwards a little. I can't see too clearly from this angle, so a side angle is best to check for bar path. But what we can do is lean forward a little bit more at the start of the lift, which will also make it feel more like a low bar squat. But yeah, just check your bar path from the side and that should be good. And then for bench, the first video, I'm not sure if the breathing sound in the video is you, but if it is, then this applies. You want to exhale after you completed the lift, like after you locked out. That's because when you exhale, like breathe out, your core loosens. So you want that to happen after you complete the lift, not during. So just breathe after you locked out. In the first video, the pause, I wouldn't say is competition pause, but the second video is. And in the second video, it looks like you started the lift as soon as you finished inhaling. So I would also say slow that down, like make sure you have a really deep breath, that you're completely braced, not just start during the breath. And also you don't have to start the lift as soon as you get the start command, just like squats. Like after they give you start, you can take as much time as you need to start the lift. There's no rush. But technique wise, it looks very good. And for deadlift, the bar rose a tiny bit when you started the pull, which means you could pull the slack out a little bit more, or maybe it's just what is set up right. And also I think you can make your lockout a little more snappier, like more explosive. So your lockouts now are good, but they're like a tiny bit soft, especially in your left knee. In your second video, your knees are a little bit soft, which will get red lighted at a meet depending on how strict they're calling it. For your knee locking out, you want to use more quads, and for your hips locking out, you want to use more glutes. I feel like your hip lockout uses a little bit more lower back, so just like lock out faster it should be like click click with your knees and your hips, and it should be really clear that you're locking out, and that would be easier on the judging and reduces the chance of you getting a red light, and also that should make your lift easier. So yeah, as a general note, I just say that all of those lifts look around RP7 then RP8. Look like you have more than 2 reps in the tank, and they all look really good. So last we have this video, and she just started barbell back squatting recently, and she has long femurs, and she said that her back squats are the most awkward lift, but I would say it actually looks really good. So I also have long femurs, so I understand that it feels awkward, and to help that feel less awkward, if you can get heel shoes, that would be great. I have Nike Romoleos 4, and that has helped me a lot with my squats because it makes your tibia, which is like your calf leg part, longer. So that makes your femurs relatively shorter. Like if you compare the two lengths, the difference is smaller when you had heels. So to try if you like heels or not, try squatting with your heels on like tiny plates or like a piece of wood or something. Make sure it's not thicker than like 0.75 of an inch. And try squatting like that and see if it helps with hitting depth and your mobility. It should help you hit depth easier, and also it should help you feel like your heels stay on the ground more. And then if that works, you should invest in heels because that will definitely help you hit depth and make just everything feel less awkward. Another tip to help you hit depth easier is to initiate the lift with your hips more than your knees, just like super slightly. So you break the hips first. That will put your knees higher and hips lower, which makes your hit depth easier. So that's just like a very small change. You don't want to overdo this at all because that does make you not mid-foot. So just a very tiny bit. And for the reps themselves, I would just say try to be more explosive on your concentric, like on the way up. Think of pushing your feet down into the ground and your back into the bar. There's nothing wrong with lifting it up slowly, other than that you maybe could do more weights and more reps if you were more explosive, since it does make the lift faster. If you're a little bit more explosive, that does help you use your glutes and your quads more. And after looking at this video very closely, it's very hard with black leggings and black shirt to see where depth is, but you are hitting depth. It's like at depth. I would say if you want to compete, to go a tiny bit lower, but this is definitely very good for flats with long femurs. If you don't plan on competing, this is totally fine, but if you plan on competing, I would really just heels and then just squatting to like the same feeling as in the video, and that would be way under parallel, and that would totally pass. But I understand that with the long femurs it feels weird and you can't go lower without feeling awkward, or like without your heels rising off the ground. But overall, your form is really good, and I like how you're taking things slow and steady. So yeah, that's it for this first episode of Form Check. Thank you so much for your submissions and letting me use your videos. I hope this really helps you guys out. If you guys have any questions, you guys definitely can email me back or leave a comment, and you can still submit more videos for next time's form check. It's like unlimited amount of submissions. It's the same process. You just fill out the form, send in the videos, and that's it. And this is the next submission deadline. And if you haven't submitted videos but you want to, definitely check out the video from last time where I went over the instructions on how to submit videos and how to fill out the form. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.